So this week, you're going to listen to 4 chapters, 16, 17, 18, and 19. However, you're only going to do 2 reading logs on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The first reading log 14, is chapter 16 and 17, and it is what is the climax of the story. So everything that happened since she got kidnapped by the barbarians until the end of tomorrow's chapter 17. Chapter 16 is titled Lunch. In a moment, only Captain Penrod and I remained. Penrod knelt in the dust at my feet. He took out a sword and handed it up to me on outstretched palms. Obviously, I didn't post enough guards, Princess Janine. You could have been killed, and it would have been my fault. Was he officially resigning from his post, or did he expect me to punish him by chopping off his head? I told him, "Take the sword back. I was getting better at remembering the royal we, simply need to be more vigilant from now on. Come on, apparently it's time to eat." I wasn't going to miss lunch again. Penrod did accept the sword back, then started with me towards the great hall. "Speaking of being vigilant," I said, "did your guards see Counselor Rodd on leave?" Penrod nodded. "He frequently goes to visit his aged mother in the country." "Very commendable," I said. "But you'd think he could skip it on the day the new king arrives." "I gather he's her sole support," Penrod said. "And she's the sole support of several grandchildren from Roddon's 2 brothers and 3 sisters, whom all died. He brings great bundles of food for them, but seemingly it's never enough. This morning, his packed horse was exceptionally laden." "Sounds like the family has had incredibly bad luck," I said. I got distracted by the thought that I knew all about grandmothers raising kids. But at least my parents were both still alive. "Any idea when he'll be back?" "He said he lives in the town of Fairfield, which is about a 2 hours ride off to the west. Usually when he goes, he spends the majority of the day with her." We arrived at the hall where lunch had already started. 2 thrones had been pushed against the furthest wall, right to the leaded glass window. Dozens of long tables have been brought in, at which people sat, and evidently divided by rank. The royal family was at the far table at the far end of the room near the thrones, away from the drafts from the doors and from the bustle of servants toting platters of food, refilling people's cups. I couldn't help but notice that they started without me, and that they left no room for me. Sir Deming and Sister Mary Ursula sat with the group that had to be the ladies in waiting, for I recognized Lady Cynthia from a couple games back. Sister Mary Ursula was still talking to Deming, even though he had arranged to sit 2 people down from her. Those servants who weren't serving the food were at one cluster of tables, and then there were a lot of other tables for the guards, although there were many empty places for those who were busy or were away, busy manning the walls or pursuing barbarians. Dogs roamed among the tables, snapping off fallen scraps of food, which would have outraged my grandmother, who believes dogs belong only outside, guarding the house or helping the blind. Penrod hesitated, not knowing whether I was finished with him and if he could go sit with his men. I couldn't start making decisions if the advisor I was most inclined to speak with wasn't here. I asked Penrod, "Do you think you could send one of your men to fetch Roddon?" Penrod immediately tapped one of his men on the shoulder. "Go to Fairfield," he ordered. "The princess commands Roddon's presence." The guard stood, shoving a half a loaf of bread under his arm, and as much food as he could fit into his mouth. I told him, "Be sure to tell Counselor Roddon he'll be welcome to return to the family in a few more days. Roddon would be little use to me if he was ticked off at having to leave his family outing and it was cut short. Be polite, I called after the man, then remembered to add, please. It suddenly occurred to me that for this particular game, the magic users had yet to be summoned. And Captain Penrod, I said to Penrod, please send a message to, was it Zenas or Aldemore who had the scrying glass? I'd like to call to the castle those who know magic. Oriel, Aldemore, and Zenas, Penrod said. He smacked another of his men on the arm. Thank you, and in all haste, please, I said. Finally, I went to the head table. They were all sitting on the benches along one side of the table. Queen Adriana, Wulfgar, Abbess, and Kendrick. The Queen was making fun of someone I didn't know, an abbot who apparently was very hard of hearing. In fact, practically deaf. What did you say? What? Oh, you said you couldn't have been the one to murder the blacksmith because you had no reason to do it? I thought you said you had a Norwegian do it. Very politically incorrect. The princes were so engrossed in this merriment that by the sheerest coincidence, not one of them noticed me standing there with no place to sit. They were spread out, 4 on a bench that looked long enough for 6 or 7. Their butts weren't that big. And if they moved over just a little bit, there would be enough room for me. The hall still buzzed with conversation, but I knew everyone was waiting to see how I would react. Would I be intimidated and slink off to another table? Would I make a scene and demand that they make space for me? I crooked one of my fingers at one of the servants. The noise level was so high, I had to put my mouth to his ear to make sure I was heard. Get me the king's throne, I ordered. The servant was aghast. Surely not for eating in. Was he worried I dribbled gravy on the velvet cushion? He glanced around and pointed out a square bench, a short one, made for 3 skinny butts, or 2 regular-sized one, or 1 royal one. Yeah, I thought, and do what? Set up a TV tray? The throne, I repeated. The conversation abruptly stopped when the servant, with the help of another man, picked up the throne. Staggering under its weight, they carried it toward where the royal family sat, then saw that, unless the royals moved their bench, and why would they when they hadn't budged yet, there was no room. I pointed to my feet to indicate right here. The servants came around to where I was and placed the throne dead center on that side of the table. I sat down and looked into the startled faces of my family. There, I smiled brightly and settled my skirt as though it was a voluminous gown, like the Queen's. Isn't this nice? And it was, except that the roast pig had been placed before them, so that I was looking at its curly-cued rear end, not the world's best view. A servant came rushing up with a bowl of rose petal water and a towel to wash and dry my hands. Other servants provided a dish heaped with slabs of roast pork and luscious fresh fruits and a cup of mead, which is sweet beer or wine or something, disgusting in my point of view. And I'm amazed Rasmussen gets away with serving alcohol, even virtual alcohol, to minors. Kendrick leaned forward and told me, "You're sitting on the wrong end of the table." "No, all of you are," I said firmly. He considered that for a moment, then gave an extraordinary smile that had caught my notice during the promos. Wulfgar glared. and I was beneath the queen's notice, so she angled herself on the bench to face Wulfgar and began to talk to him about the quality of the peaches. And Abbas decided I needed an instant replay of his battle against the 3 barbarians in the courtyard. I was pleased to note that Wulfgar didn't tear into his meat as a beast would, but ate with the same degree of table manners as everybody else. Those 8 manners were about equal to what you'd see in an elementary school cafeteria, and I could live with that. "You were fantastic," I assured Abbas when he paused to take a breath. "One of them mentioned something about a crown. The crown of Breck?" I looked at each of them in turn and was able to tell nothing. "Any of you know anything about that?" Kendrick said, "Father won a crown from one of the barbarian kings." "Won? How? You mean he killed him? Or overcame him in battle? Or he won it in a poker game?" My subconscious tried to warn me the people in this game would not play poker. The phrase, "a game of dice," bubbled up. But the Rasmussen programs are sophisticated enough to ignore most anacrostic phrases and references. Otherwise, the game would constantly be delayed by the characters saying things like, "Okay, I do not understand this okay of which you speak." Kendrick blinked. Perhaps his subconscious, if he had one, told him poker must be some peasant gambling game he never heard of before. But perhaps he chose to ignore one of the many inane things I said. "He won it in a tournament," is what he said. Abbas interrupted. "I wasn't old enough to participate in that particular tournament, except for in the capacity of a page, helping the squires help the knights get into their armor, but I remember it well. 2 years later was my first—" "In a moment, Abbas," I said. "So your father won the tournament, winning the loser's horse and equipment?" Yes, said both Abbas and Kendrick. But Abbas was inclined to add a blow-by-blow account of the event. I went ahead and talked right over him. But if your father won the crown fairly, why do the barbarians feel they have a right to demand it back?" "Because they are barbarians," Abbas said, which I would have accepted, but Kendrick's lips twitched, and he chose that moment to lift his cup to his mouth. "What?" I demanded. Kendrick answered with a question of his own. "Who said anything about winning it fairly?" "Kendrick!" his mother snapped. "That's no way to talk about your father." From the look he gave her, I gathered he wasn't used to hearing her defend King Cedric's good name. "Well," Abbas admitted, "there were certain questions." "He cheated?" I said. "You're saying he won the crown by cheating. So now the barbarians want that crown back, and in fact, they probably have every right to it?" Abbas spoke slowly so that I would understand. "No, he won the event, so he won the crown." Wulfgar was gnawing with alarming energy every last bit of meat off of bone, but at least he had the bone raised to his mouth, rather than sinking his face into the pig carcass. Queen Adriana was making one of the dogs stand on its hind legs and beg for a strip of meat. "So where is this crown?" I asked. "I don't know," Kendrick said. Abbas shook his head to indicate he didn't either. "Wulfgar?" "Don't know." "Your Highness?" She gave me a blank look. "I'm sorry, what? Were you saying something? I wasn't listening." Though I had already seen that she had been, I explained, "The crown your late husband won from the barbarian king at the tournament several years back. What happened to it?" "I'm sure I have no idea," she told me. I summoned one of the servants. Could you please get that bench? I indicated the one I had been offered earlier. And bring it here. Then invite Sir Deming and Sister Mary Ursula to join us. On the serving side of the table? The servant asked. On this side of the table, I corrected him. When the two advisors had just sat down, I explained about the crown and asked if they knew where it was. Perhaps in the king's treasure room, Sister Mary Ursula suggested. Deming shook his head. He gave it to the dragon. What dragon? I asked. Deming sniffed at my ignorance. The one that was ravaging the South Provinces 8 years ago, burning fields, scattering livestock, devastating manor houses, demanding maiden sacrifices. The faintest hint of imposed memory trickled into the edge of my brain, but I had only been 6, and in the southern province we're nearly a week's journey from the safety of Saint Jean. But I had heard people talking. I said, Excuse me, but I don't understand. This dragon was eating cows, horses, and maidens, and then King Cedric bought him off by giving him a crown that he had won in an iffy tournament? Deming rolled his eyes, and the queen gave a sympathetic look like, I know. Deming said, Dragons like gold. Put that in your notes. That's important, kids. And a crown, Sister Mary Ursula added, that would make the dragon feel as one with all the other kings. Okay. I guess that made sense. Do we know where the dragon lives? I asked. No. Nope. Haven't a clue, they all told me. Any idea how I can find it out? No. Nope. Haven't a clue, they all repeated. But then Deming speculated. Maybe one of the magic users knows something or can find out. Waiting for the magic users again, Estimated time of arrival tomorrow. And if I remembered correctly from the last time, and I did, I was working on a deadline. Never mind the awful pun. Ooh, magic, Sister Mary Ursula said. Nasty stuff. Best to keep away from it. As much as possible, I assured her, just to keep her happy. Deming sighed. If, he said, sounding as though each moment of speaking politely was an effort. If you're determined to return the crown of the barbarian king, may I point out to you that the king is, in fact, currently separated from his head, thanks to our Prince Abbess, and I would consider this a serious drawback to the enjoyment of wearing a crown. That's a good point, I said. We'll send a messenger to the barbarian camp apologizing for the unfortunate death of their king, which happened by mischance since he did not openly declare himself but led a raiding party into the castle courtyard. As a sign of goodwill, we will forgive this raid and return the crown to King Grimbald's successor. Deming pursed his thin lips. Do you think they'd accept an apology for killing their brand new king? Adriana was looking directly at me when she answered, I would. Accidents happen. I could imagine. I forced a smile to her. To Deming I said, It's the best we can do. See to sending of the messenger. Now, what about the unrest among the peasants? Our laws are too harsh, Sister Mary Ursula said. Too lenient, Deming countered. I like the death penalty, Abbess said, before you abolished it. Can we bring it back now? We never really came to a conclusion. I felt I didn't know enough to ask the right questions, and nobody volunteered much of an interest. The servants were cleaning up the remains of the meal, and we were the only ones still sitting. The guards I had sent in pursuit of the barbarian raiding party returned, having lost the trail in the woods. Another set of guards were sent to find the barbarian camp to offer official regrets for Grimwald's death. Meanwhile, I needed to wait for Rodon's return to make a decision about the peasants, and I needed to wait for the magic users to do anything before tracking down the dragon who had the the Slayer's crown. Well, I said, looking at my filthy sheep herder's dress, maybe now is the time for me to get cleaned up. Ooh, Sister Mary Ursula said, I have an extra dress for you to use. Since she looked as though she wore Feridonia the Knitter's hand-me-downs, I said, maybe something from one of the ladies in weddings would be more appropriate. I can arrange that too, she told me. She showed me to one of the second-floor rooms, but it wasn't Lady Cynthia's this time. This lady's name was Bliss. One glance told me that if Bliss shopped at the mall, she would need clothes whose sizes include at least a couple of X's. Oh, this is such an honor, Bliss giggled, so pleased her feet practically fluttered on the ground. Thank you for choosing me. Well, I started. I have so many clothes, she told me, because, she leaned forward to whisper as though we shared a secret, I do have a bit of a weight problem. Okay, I thought, this might work. But as she flung dresses out of her clothes chest onto her bed, I saw that her sizes varied from big to very big. Isn't this a pretty red one? She said. It is, I agreed. I couldn't ask for Lady Cynthia by name because I have never been introduced to her in this lifetime, and I hated to ask for just any other lady because Bliss was so enthusiastic. Did Rasmussen want me to be nice to her and make her my friend for a particular reason? Or were they only intent to making me look like a fool? Still, I couldn't look any worse than I did now. So I chose the red velvet gown, and after I finally got my bath with a lot of tucks and gathers and a belt, eventually got the dress around me. I had just fastened the magic ring around my neck with the length of a ribbon when somebody knocked at Lady Bliss's door. Captain of the Guard, Penrod announced from the hallway, looking for Princess Janine. Bliss opened the door for him. And doesn't she look exquisite? She asked. I think clean was really the best we could say, in all honesty, but Penrod didn't have time to quibble. Bad news, Highness, he announced, regarding the messengers dispatched to try to make peace with the barbarian camp. Regarding the messengers dispatched to make peace with the barbarian camp, I asked, though it seemed too soon for them to have any results yet. Penrod shook his head. Regarding Counselor Rodon. Now what? The man I sent to Fairfield just returned. He said there was no one in Fairfield answering the description of Penrod's mother. But you sure it was Fairfield that Rodon said he was going to? I asked. Positive, Penrod said. I tried to work this out. Rodon said Fairfield, and he carries bundles of food for his family. It suddenly struck me that when I had asked the servants carrying the pig if they had seen Rodon, one of them had said something about Rodon getting field rations for his trip. Surely field rations weren't carried in great bundles. How long has Rodon been sent bringing supplies to his mother? I asked. About 3 months. And how long has it been since you've been having trouble getting paid? Slowly, Penrod said, about 3 months. I was beginning to get a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. Did I hear somebody say something about the king having a treasure room? Penrod took me there. a locked chamber off the king's own bedroom. Guards had to kick in the door because Rawdon had the key. It was an enormous room, bigger than even the king's bedchamber. And of course, the room was totally empty. So give me about 3 or 4 sentences on this one. This is RL14. And then listen to the next chapter and get the other 2 or 3 sentences from the next chapter. Thank you.